welcome to the Soyle Podcast. I'm Tom LC Shipp.
I'm Jack Gleeson.
And I'm SK.
And today we are talking about moral arguments and stories, how to fine-tune them, what they are, why are they important, do you need them?
And also, what is the difference between the morality within a story and the morality within, real life? Because those are kind of two different things.
Maybe we should define morality to begin with.
Okay, well, let's talk about that then first. Yeah. So when we say morality within a story versus morality within real life, right? What we're talking about is that morality within the story is focused, right? It's
I meant let's define morality.
Oh, well, I think philosophers have been trying to do that for many, many years.
No,
okay, morality is
how
you
right and wrong.
Yeah, it's about decisions and choices that affect other people, that could hurt or benefit other people. Just generally speaking,
is just the decision of what's right and what's wrong. Now we can apply it to everything else.
Okay, well.
Sorry, did you lose your train of thought?
No.
Okay.
No,
it was just so basic. I couldn't even begin to understand.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't think we were making baby's first podcast here.
Yeah,
we're gonna get in the
alienate all the beginning writers.
No, but what we're talking about when we say something like morality versus story and versus real life is that, the morality within a story is a lot more focused, right? Somebody can do something within a story, and I think we've talked about this before in the podcast, which is somebody can do something in a story that you would disagree with morally for yourself, but the story might not be focusing on that, and so it might not necessarily treat it as something that's morally wrong. Right? The camera might not linger on them when they do the thing. It might not have a character jump in and say, hey, this is wrong of you to do. It might just kind of let them do it and move on. That's kind of the difference there, is that even though we might see an action as something that's morally wrong or that's something that we disagree with, the story might not treat it as such because it's not actually about that realm of morality.
Let me read a quote from Truby's book, Anatomy of Story. A great story is not simply a sequence of events or surprises designed to entertain an audience. It is a sequence of actions with moral implications and effects designed to express a larger theme. And we've talked about theme before. It's the author's view of how to act in the world. So the question is, as a writer, how do you know what moral choices your characters make? What's the importance and everything?
The starting point I always go back to, and this is going all the way back to episode 2 where we talked about how to start a story, right? And my usual fallback plan of how do you even get started is just, what is it that you want to explore morally within yourself? What's an interesting concept to you that you don't fully understand yet? And if you can focus on that, it'll make the story writing process more fun, and you'll be able to get more nuance out of what you're talking about. So if you go, this is an example that I've been using with Tom while we've been talking about his story, and I've been using it a few other places too, is say you want to cover the topic of racism, right? And it's racism is just, I think we all kind of understand, oh yeah, racism equals bad, right? So you could make the bad guy of your story be the racist person, and the good guy of your story be the not racist person, right? And yay, you can be very black and white about it and not really go much deeper than that. But if you swap those two characters around and make your main character the racist person, well, crap, how do you make it so that people actually want to follow this person and hear their story? If they're just blanketly racist and they're basically acting like the bad guy, well, now you need to understand why they're racist and right. So then you start diving into the morality of it and the complexity of the situation, and you might discover how human beings have this intrinsic need to categorize things and how that can be led astray, but also how it can be useful. And so you can go into these different avenues, and you can use different characters within the story to explore those different avenues by having them already know about it and say something along those lines of, well, I'm not racist because X, and so you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so by exploring the nuance and the depth of whatever moral decision or moral idea you're interested in, you actually just kind of give yourselves all the things you need to figure out what type of characters you need to have in your story in the first place. And so it just, by going deeper, you actually expand on your story as well.
SK, how would you start about thinking about morals in a story?
Well, I don't typically know what it is when I begin. So I put characters in situations until a moral choice develops. I don't know what it is, but I don't like to tell a story that way by
Yeah,
knowing
no, I think
exactly what's
fairly
happening.
common too.
Right. Yeah, I feel weird when I'm trying to think of my own characters and like I start with like my character's already on a moral high ground. I don't want to start that way.
Why not?
First of all, just like one of my characters just seems too much like Doctor Who because that's just, the moral kind of epitome there. It's hard to be a moral bastard when you're in charge of time, I guess. I don't know. I'm sure
Imagine the
there's
villain antics that you could get up to if you were a morally corrupt bastard and had control of time.
I mean, there's literally a character in Doctor Who that does that. So
Yeah, but it's not the Doctor.
that's true.
Right. So, like, yeah, is morality a good place to start when trying to figure out what characters you have? I do like your idea about going deeper. So, you have characters' desires, which are very surface, you know what those are. Then you have their need, which is in their unconscious, that's to be revealed over the story and through their actions. So, that's interesting that like something like racism, it could start as like everybody feels like they pretty much know racism, but it can go so much deeper about if you go into a person's history of like trauma, if you go into like even just factors of the brain, that we have a natural propensity towards racism. Like the amygdala will, within like half of a second, will activate if it notices color of a different race. But characters or people can choose to like how do they respond to that or how they're trained to respond to that. So there's a lot of complexity. It's not just racism is bad.
Exactly.
Like you said.
Now, SK, I'm curious, and maybe you don't have the answer for this, but when you start with just kind of having your characters and putting them into complex situations and kind of feeling out where the moral choice is, how do you discover what that moral choice is, and how do you know if that moral choice is like in line with other things that you've already done within the story?
How do I sew it back in?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's relevant to plot because you can have any two characters argue about anything, and you can have any situation occur essentially, especially in fiction. So it's not so much that I just pit them against each other and see what happens because it's not always that interesting. Where do I think the story's going, and if there's a message that I'm trying to tell, is it actually a moral message, or am I just following hype? Am I just trying to do something cool? But once those characters actually have like true conflict, you have to get to the core of that, and then sometimes you have to change things.
How so?
Well, I mean, like the bigger things. Maybe the thing I was planning on doing doesn't work anymore because the true conflict doesn't support it.
Okay.
So I try not to have too much worked out before that happens. Once I have a couple of good characters that I know will challenge each other in a specific way, I start tailoring it to that.
So you start with kind of you develop these characters and maybe you have a general kind of idea of kind of what they're doing through the plot, and then when you kind of put them in front of each other and force them into conflict, you look at like what their actual deeper conflict really is, and then that kind of gives you an insight into okay, that's what the story's actually about.
Right.
So you develop like just interesting characters on their own first, and then let kind of the underlying stuff come about. Do you do all this stuff before you get started writing?
Yeah, for the most part.
Have you ever come into a situation where you've already written something, and then you realize that there's a deeper conflict going on that doesn't quite fit with what you've already written?
Yeah, that's called draft 2.
Draft 2.
Fair, fair enough.
Well, I'm the specific kind of writer where I don't like to write anything until I know what's happening. So I spend a lot of time in the brainstorming process.
So let's maybe talk about some specific examples because moral is so abstract. Do you have any particular favorite or moral arguments in stories, or can you think of any?
Yeah. So the thing that pops up in my head is actually I'm glad you brought up Doctor Who because it's from Doctor Who, and I think I may have shown this to both of you already. But there's a there's a speech that the Doctor gives, and it's about war. Right? It hit me like to my core to the point where how you get a song stuck in your head sometimes. I had the speech stuck in my head, like it kept playing on loop, and I couldn't like make it stop.
What a nerd.
But the idea was, I'll gloss over a lot of the details here, but basically two factions were against each other. They wanted to wipe the other person out, and they had, some device that the Doctor had set up beforehand that basically would have a 50-50 chance of wiping the other people out or themselves out. But because it was like such an easy thing to be able to just like wipe the other person out, both factions were willing to take the chance and press the button. And so in the scene, basically the doctor really gives this impassioned speech about how this is a scale model of war right here. When you first press the button, no matter how right you feel in the moment, you have no idea who's going to die. You have no idea whose children are going to scream and burn. Sorry. Until everybody has to do what they were always going to have to do from the very beginning, is sit down and talk, right? And there's another part of this that also really got to me, which was the one character who is kind of the quote, the bad guy within this story is like, I'm going to do this thing. And the doctor's just like, well, okay, but let me ask you something, when the whole world is just and perfect and everything is exactly the way that you want it, how are you going to defend your glorious revolution from the next one? What are you going to do with the people like you who stand up and disagree?
V for Vendetta.
We'll win. And he's like, oh, will you? Well, maybe you will win. Nobody wins for long. The wheel just keeps turning. And so it was just this wonderful fucking speech that went into like a lot of different areas about it. God, it got to me. I loved it. So, but the morality there, of course, being the complexities of war. But like pretty much any other war story I had ever seen up to that point had been like just, war is bad. War is hell because, it's even worse than hell because, at least in hell, only the bad people die or are tortured or whatever, right? But in war, everybody suffers.
Except for Private Ryan. He gets out.
Well, yeah, there you go.
He lost three brothers.
Yeah, exactly.
See? He shouldn't have got captured.
So
whatever. I guess he was trapped.
Yeah, so like it only ever kind of gotten a simplistic kind of like war is bad because death and suffering. But I liked how they took it from into a different perspective of it's not just that it's bad, it's that it's fucking pointless because by doing it that way, by changing society in a violent manner and like subjugating the people who have been your subjugators, all it does is turn them into the next resistance. It
recursive.
Exactly. Point was that it was a new complex like view on kind of an idea I had already seen, and that's why it stuck with me so much. And I think that's something that I, at least personally, I look for in stories is not just a moral message that I can agree with, but one that's like has a new take on some form of morality, like some deeper understanding of it that I can then take and digest and apply to myself, or at least my understanding of the world. And so I think those are the most powerful things. So if you can do your research into the moral of your story and like actually discover a new way of thinking about a moral idea, or at least something that you haven't seen before, then it's possible that other people won't have seen it either, and you might give them something to think about at the end of your story, which I think is impactful. That's what makes a story impactful, I think. So
yeah, kind of interesting. Yeah, the nuances of moral argument when a lot of the villains kind of tend to be similar in stories. Like you have the guy who wants to, or the person who wants to destroy everything, and you have the person who wants to take control. So like either just take the other side and turn them into pawns, warriors, whatever. Just kind of envelop them. And it's like you see that with the Daleks who want to travel through time and just turn everyone into a fucking R2-D2 Dalek.
No, they just want to eradicate everybody else.
Oh, eradicate.
Exterminate.
Exterminate. Got it.
Nailed
it. I murdered the Daleks. But that's also in the Clone Wars with they have this like the blue shadow virus. And then my story, I just have this Dream Institute trying to create a collective nightmare unconscious, kind of broadcasting nightmares into people in order to make them fall under this certain way of thinking of fear. And then like Lord of the Rings.
The goat on your own story.
I mean, that's how it starts. It's It's like Lord of the Rings, like when you see the trolls coming out of the mountains.
3,000 years ago, this Brain Institute created these nightmare dreams.
So it's like with the moral argument, is that like where the meat of the story is, that like differentiates stories from each other, that are like basically about war and the same.
I was wondering if Eska had something, but yeah, I would say it is.
Well, fuck me. What?
No, I wasn't.
Yeah,
sure.
quick enough.
I thought I heard you like getting ready to say something, so I wasn't. Sure.
I'm still like on deck to answer the question of do I have a favorite moral message or not.
Oh yes.
I didn't know that we were going for one example and that was it.
I didn't either, but
I know there were one pump and done.
Well, as we all know, my view on it is all that really is important.
SK, what's your favorite moral
Yeah, SK,
argument?
what's your favorite moral message in the story?
Wow.
Even though we all know it's probably not going to be as important as mine.
We're bad boyfriends, we know.
What is going on?
Uh,
I don't even know if I want to now. No, I don't think I have a very specific moral message. I like grandiose moral messages because I like to dissect them and find the intrinsic qualities within them. But my favorite one in terms of just how popular it is always like revenge stories. Because take any film where the ultimate goal by the hero is to kill somebody. In like standard morality, we all pretty much agree that murder is wrong. But these these stories, all they do is like try and prove to you that in this circumstance it's okay to kill somebody. And it's like almost everyone agrees. And it's like, okay, so do we have all of these rules about why murder is okay?
right.
It's like Taken. If someone kidnaps your daughter and tries to sell them as a sex slave, you definitely are allowed to kill that guy. And everyone in the theater is like, yeah, for sure. I wish I could go to France and kill a Saudi prince or whoever the fuck that guy is at the end, the sheik.
Yeah.
But what is it about the revenge fantasy that we always have to? Is it our innate lust for murder? Is it just don't touch my meat? Is it caveman brang unga bunga? I need to kill that man over meat.
Well,
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like, I mean, obviously, it feels good to be able to like be justified in something, right? And so and
why murder specifically? It's not always murder. Sometimes it's about crippling the enemy. Sometimes it's about taking away just all their power.
It's in our lizard brain. It's a form of justice, right? It's the form of justice we had before we had the justice system.
I think it's also protection too, right? If someone comes and like out of nowhere, you're just on your pasture, kills all your cows, and you just do nothing, they can come back and just kill all your new cows. You got to go and like protect, like in The Last of Us 2 at the beginning.
I was wondering if you were going to bring it up. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a classic revenge tale, which has a really heavy moral argument at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, it kind of goes the opposite direction with the moral argument, though, in that one.
Yeah, but we won't spoil it. Sorry. But it's about Joel, the main character. First one just gets fucking murked.
Yep.
His head gets fudged by a golf club, and the whole story is about Ellie getting revenge. And it's actually interesting. Like in anthropology, they find that revenge is actually more popular in kind of like more desert or the South. So like honor.
I was not gonna say that,
but sure. But that has to do with honor. And like when your honor is offended, you have to go and get revenge.
Well, yeah, I have to come out blasting with my pistol.
It's like if you
stand 10 paces and face me, coward.
If you have a rivalry or whatever with some other tribe or whatever the fuck, right? You might really want to go fuck them up, but also like. Maybe you have a bit of a morality and you're like, we can't just go and like take their shit because it's like they're people too, right? But if they come over and as soon as they commit
the Pearl Harbor Act,
then it's like, oh, okay, now we can go.
All the rules are out the window. Fine.
Exactly. It's a like it feels like it's a survivalist like justification thing to like get over the more civilized part of our brains.
What will I do? If I kill this man, will I not get into heaven? And then suddenly they like shoot your daughter in the neck, and it's like, well, God's gonna have to forgive me on this one.
Exactly.
He knows.
He knows.
They wrote the book, eye for an eye. Mm-hmm. I'm taking a neck for a neck, dog.
Yeah, this is
justified. He's letting me.
He's letting me.
He's the one who averted my gaze to that rock. I'm gonna take that rock, sharpen it, and turn it into a boomerang machete.
Wow.
So I just fear when it comes back.
I'll know it. I know it has done the work if it is covered in blood.
I think those types of stories, like, they feel good because, you essentially are getting justice for something. But also, I think it's important to look at those stories and take your own message out of them, right? Because, so in Last of Us, the character makes a decision at the end, right? You can agree with it or disagree with it, right? But it's not really about saying, I mean, maybe they are trying to say, their decision is the right one to make, right? Or in Taken, the decision that he makes is the right one to make. Maybe they're trying to say that, but just because the story is trying to say that doesn't mean you have to then blindly believe it or anything like that, right? You can still look at the situation that led to that character's decision and make your own decision on it and go, well, I, fundamentally believe that human life is valuable or whatever, and regardless of what somebody does, I won't take it. And it's easy to say that in a clinical perspective, which is kind of what the point of these revenge stories is that you can have a character who says that exactly, then something fucking happens to him that pushes him over the edge, and that's it, right? And so I think the revenge stories are sort of like, here's another example, under these circumstances, are you still going to hold to your principles or not? And so I think it's about analyzing yourself at that point and going, if I was in this situation, would I still act in the same way or would I not?
That was very eloquent, but I keep thinking of the meme where it's, if it were not for the laws of this land, I would have slain you long ago. Oh, God. Oh, African warlord memes are the best.
But I think, in that situation, it's also important to, sometimes you'll get a story where that's, a revenge story is actually a really good one to kind of talk about, because I'll hear, after seeing one of those, a lot of people who watch it going, yeah, if I was in that situation, I'd do the same fucking thing, fuck that guy, I'd, destroy them, or I'd, do all these things. And part of me also goes, maybe you need to look at that story and see how much you got glee out of it, and maybe look at yourself a little bit deeper than...
Jack on his high moral horse.
Oh, dear.
A moral horse that would never commit a horse murder.
I don't know, I've thought about that myself as well. I definitely have that kind of moral, I try not to, but also
I'd kill someone.
I've been put in situations maybe twice where that's definitely been challenged. Just in terms of how I wanted to act, not necessarily what I did, just how I wanted to.
Okay, so you're telling me you didn't commit 2 murders?
Right, exactly.
Not on the record.
Horse
I
murders.
just, at one point, one of my nephews, got lost for a couple minutes at the water park or whatever, and, the second somebody told me that he was missing, I went into I'm going to kill anybody who gets in my way mode.
I don't know who you are, but I will find you.
Get out of my way.
I was...
slide.
Yeah. Just, instant. It just, all of my morality just went immediately out the window. I was like, nope, that's the only thing that's important right now. Is
lizard brain
right?
tell me to fuck.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's like a human thing,
Yeah.
though, right? It's like, do I follow my responsibilities, my duties, or do I protect either someone I love, my
important
group,
is this social construct
strangers?
that we've all
Right,
just
right.
manufactured?
It's like,
society
don't you love?
versus- yeah.
It's like when a Nazi in a movie is kind of like, okay, you guys can go. It's like, what? A fucking Nazi? Just let us go.
Yeah.
I don't trust this guy. And he's just a cool guy sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a great example of that is in The Pianist.
Yeah, I was trying to think about when I saw that. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, he's hiding in the attic or whatever of that blown out house, and the guy finds him, and he's just he starts bringing him food instead of turning him in, and then they
Bad
all leave
Nazi.
or whatever. Yeah, and they all
Naughty
leave,
Nazi.
and the story ends, and you see that the guy who helped him sitting in a prison camp or whatever, and he runs up to the fence. He's like, "Hey, tell somebody that get that guy." I don't remember the main character's name. This is my name. I helped him. Please. And,
Adrian Brody.
At the end of the movie, they were like, "Yeah, that guy," because it's based on a real story, right? It's a real person's actual experience in World War II, and apparently that Nazi guy in some way disappeared in the 50s. Basically, he was in prison for for many years, and they don't know what happened to him after that.
Went to go party in the Canary Islands.
So he walked out of prison and then immediately evaporated. It's like, oh my god.
They all went to the islands, I think, or some of them.
Totally. So
I haven't seen The Pianist, so I don't know.
Oh, that's a great movie. Yeah, that's definitely
Penis.
something you should add to your...
Yeah, I think you'd love The Pianist.
Are you making fun of the way I said that, or are you just
I was just being a dick.
you were just razzing me?
Yeah.
So, getting back to Tom, you had a question of is that what makes a story? Is that the thing? And I would argue yes, because that's kind of all there really is to take out of a story. I suppose you can take out a psychological thing from it as well, of like, oh wow, what a cool idea. Like, I think the Matrix had something like that, of like, oh, are we all in a simulation? And so there was like sort of a philosophical question that was introduced to the masses there. But for the most part, it's difficult to find brand new fucking concepts to introduce to people. So the new concepts, the places that we're still exploring and probably will forever be exploring, is morality. And so I think the stories that come to you with a new way of seeing morality are the ones that last. They're the ones that we go, oh wow, now I gotta fucking think about this at the end.
Maybe.
I mean, think about a story that doesn't do that. Can you? Can you remember a story that didn't do that? Probably a very forgetful
that didn't
story.
have a new take on morality.
Or at least had some sort of interesting message behind it.
Taken didn't have a new take on morality.
I would argue it kind of did. At least
How?
it introduced another. Well, the revenge stories I think are popular and we're able to make a lot of them because there's always a new like way of saying, okay, under these circumstances, would you? And so Taken doesn't really have to do too much, and just all it does is go, well, if your daughter was literally kidnapped and taken as a sex slave, would you? Would you fucking go and fuck some people up?
I think there have been other stories about that.
I mean, I don't mean that it has to be like
Paris, right?
unique.
They are Helen of Troy.
Sure.
One of the first stories.
Unique to you.
Okay, so your first exposure is also important.
Yeah, and so the more impactful stories that like society goes, oh, whoa, are the ones that are able to introduce a new moral perspective or new take on a similar idea that most people haven't seen before.
I don't know if I'm just like morally corrupt, but I don't find that interesting. When I'm watching it's
like hard, yeah.
When I'm watching it, it's like, oh, okay, whoa. But if it doesn't like resonate with my own life, I don't really give a shit after that.
All right, so that's an important distinction then.
It could be a good story. It could be very cool, but it can do a lot of stuff. But if it's not like immediately applicable to my life, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. It's like, I'm glad I spent the $8 to come see this, but I'm not walking home and then laying down at night thinking about Castaway.
Well, sure.
How about that man getting lost and then having to give up his wife? Whoa.
I don't think my experience with that Doctor Who speech is necessarily a common thing.
No, I don't. Right. I don't think so either. You usually don't hear a speech about war and think about, oh, the grandeurs of war. Oh no.
Right.
Well, I thought it was very applicable to what's happening now.
I think it's always applicable to what's happening now, and I think that's kind of its weakness. Also, is like, well, yeah, war is complex. Yeah, for sure, dog. Well, somehow, in like 10,000 years of society, we still haven't been able to get rid of it. Because what am I supposed to do when I go in the lunchroom and someone says, "Would you like a chocolate milk?" It's like, well, I like strawberry. Well, we don't do strawberry here. Is that not a wartime act? I think I go to war over that.
So I think that's good in like trying to figure out what's the message you're trying to send when you begin the story. Like, you want something that people can relate to.
I mean, to an extent, I think, or at least something that like somehow can hit close to home, something that they can apply.
Right. Like, right. I can read some examples from Truby's book about the theme lines, like Harry Potter, when you're blessed with great talent and power, you must become a leader and sacrifice for the good of others. Christmas Carol, a person lives a much happier life when he gives to others. So that's how you take it. Stories are usually extreme, but the theme line is what connects it to your everyday life, because your actions, your choices, your decisions. What's the importance? Yeah. And now, as a writer, what do you want to say? What's the message you want to say that people can take for their everyday life?
Yeah, and I think it's like, you can either approach it from, do you have a point to make? And if you do have a point to make, then make sure that you are really giving the opposite point a fair shot. And make sure that you're actually exploring it, because otherwise the people who disagree with you, who you're kind of trying to convince by making a point in this story, they're going to feel like you didn't do your
You're only hardening their position.
Yeah. So you got to like actually think about the reality of why somebody would believe the opposite thing of what you believe. And
communism just hasn't been implemented correctly yet. I don't want to watch this fucking capitalist propaganda.
God.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Star Wars?
Doing. How is Star Wars capitalist propaganda?
Well, it makes infinite money, and it is about war.
And even though it's terrible, it keeps somehow making infinite money.
Yeah.
Okay, are we talking about a meta-analysis of Star Wars as a film series, or are we talking about the morality within Star Wars?
Distinction, Tom. Remember?
Wait, you're talking about Hallmark movies? What are we talking about?
Yeah, I did actually miss the example, SK, that you had brought up.
About what?
Capitalist propaganda. Or
Yeah.
like,
I didn't have an example.
Oh.
No, I was just the hypothetical.
oh no.
They didn't represent my idea correctly, so I'm not
Right.
gonna change my mind.
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Mm.
I think
So-
morality tale is just it's all about the other, and if you don't represent the other in a fair light, anyone who embodies the other is not going to like what you're going to say.
It's like, are you making it for you and those who agree with you, or are you making it for the wider audience? In order
Don't
to try
preach to the choir.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Right.
and then the other option is maybe you don't have a point going into it initially, right? But you're just curious about a subject and you want to learn more about it. And so I think that is a more honest approach, and I think it will it tends to allow people to explore a topic more because they might not come into it with a bias, when they're writing it. So if you can start a story by just going, well, I want to kind of explore the moral idea of, like, let's just keep using racism here, right? I want to explore the moral idea there, without actually saying what is wrong or good or bad or whatever, then it kind of gives you more freedom to just kind of explore it in any way you want, right? You can explore it in different ways that maybe somebody hasn't already. Because if you're starting it by going, well, racism's bad, why? It's like, people have already done that. People have already explored that. But if you can explore it from just, well, what's a new way of thinking about racism? Then maybe you can actually find a deeper conflict beyond just racism that is actually at play and makes your story unique and interesting.
Okay, so we covered author to audience, but now we can talk about character to character. So, like, if you don't know what your moral argument is, you can find that out by putting your character's values in conflict.
Right.
So, how would you all approach that?
That's kind of what we're getting at here, is like when you're exploring the nuances of a moral idea, right? There's going to be certain things that are in conflict in order to allow a person to hold a set of beliefs versus another, right? So if somebody is racist and somebody isn't, at some point in their belief structure, they're going to have some value that's different or some experience that's different. And so that's ultimately what your story is about. And so that's, the things that are actually coming into conflict there. It's not really about racism. It's about whatever that difference between those two characters is. And depending on how you've done your research into what your moral messaging is, those things can be very different from story to story, right? You can focus on different things. And so the way I would approach it, because I kind of think of stories from a top-down approach, is starting with kind of the moral message and filling out the story based on that. The characters exist as kind of very distinct points along the spectrum of the morality that you're exploring. Of, this person believes in this person believes in the opposite, this person believes in, not necessarily a point between those two things, but really more of like a third arm, right? You've expanded to not just be a black and white morality, but a very nuanced, complex, multi-dimensional spectrum, right? And so you have different characters all along it.
Yeah, I'd say that helps me to create characters when I'm trying to think about what character include. Just think of what moral aspect I'm trying to highlight, new moral nuance.
And sometimes, some characters are going to agree with each other because maybe they hold similar values, and in conflict with a third character, they have to align in order to, overcome that other person. But in a different situation, they might be very opposed to each other, right? And so that's how you get that complexity, is like, if you have a lot of different values that these different characters hold, in certain scenes they're going to be aligned along a certain value, and in a different scene they're going to be in conflict with each other. And by having that conflict back and forth, you ultimately start painting this greater picture of the whole morality that you're exploring. So SK, from the perspective of kind of going about it from kind of the opposite direction, right? From the characters and figuring out what the conflict is at that point. How do you end up, like, including characters, or creating them in the first place, or going, oh, these two characters need to be combined, or this character isn't doing anything for me, I'm getting rid of them? How do you kind of go about it from the other direction?
You mean having different positions on the moral argument?
Yeah.
Once I figure out what is supposed to be going on, and those two characters or three characters or whatever the situation is, those guys, they have their opinions, they have their positions. If it's important enough and everyone needs to have a position on it, but they don't yet, I'll just start assigning things to them if it matters. I don't like to do it too much because it seems facetious. I don't want to just give somebody this huge internal conflict just because it supports the story. Maybe assign them a subplot instead so they can explore something else. But a lot of times I find that most characters don't have the argument defined for them yet. So I can put them in a situation and explore it instead. But I don't have this process of, well, time to fill out the spectrum. A lot of times there's positions that don't ever get owned by someone because I don't think it always supports the world. It's like, oh, there should be like a Gandhi type character. It's like, well, in a world like this, is there a Gandhi? There might not be.
Right.
So I don't like to mechanically create positions for moral arguments unless they make sense within the world. You can skew them a little bit and have them be new, but pushing them to the extreme of some situation that the society doesn't actually support seems almost irresponsible.
Okay, well, I'm curious. So when you're gauging that, right? So say you've identified you have some sort of value or position that you haven't covered, right? How do you make the decision of, is this thing important to the story, and thus I need to have a character who exists that kind of encompasses it, and thus you might even have to change the society in order to make it work, or that it's not important enough and you should throw it away because the stuff you already have in place is more important. How do you like weigh those two things?
Well, generally, if I have to change the whole society to support the idea, it might be too radical to begin with, but it's fair enough to look at the story and say, well, am I really saying anything if I'm keeping it this narrow? Most of the time I'll take one of those arguments that seems fringe for the society, and then 3 or 4 character changes down the road, have somebody embody it, but through like a natural osmosis, not just, okay, let's force a situation where this guy suddenly has this extremist view.
So,
Let's tenderly get someone to believe this.
Right.
If it's important.
There's like a strange balance, right? About how to explore all the possible aspects of a moral argument while negotiating like with the world and the characters and the audience. So that it's a difficult thing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That is kind of why I tend to start from a really high level sort of structural stuff, is because then it allows me to like work my way into the details and fill them out based only on, does it like ultimately feed into what I'm really trying to do here. I think it's more fun and interesting from the other direction, because you're kind of like allowed to sort of just explore like, what is this character and like what is the society and what is the story I'm telling, and you can kind of play around with it a lot more. It's a lot more free form, but it also means I think it's more difficult to ultimately weave things together in a fully cohesive way. I mean, SK, do you agree with that, or do you find that it's actually easier to do it the way you've been describing?
I prefer the constraints. I like the organic approach of having to transition from point to point. Mm-hmm. I don't like having the sandbox. I think that's, I don't know. I prefer it in the very beginning, but not for the moral argument.
I see.
Just for the design.
I'm interested to hear you say that simply because we've, without spoiling too much about what we've been working on, but you and I have been working on a story together, and we've kind of been taking it from the top-down approach. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on, have we been spending too much time doing the top-down approach stuff on that story, or like, how would we approach that story differently if we were, should we approach that story differently or not?
No, I think it's fine, because we have a synergy between the top-down approach and having a few story moments that we really like.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's kind of how I can get around it in my head, is that we have these points that we like to cover, and by the time we realize that something needs to go or needs to get changed, I'm okay with it because it organically got there. But having the jumping off point of, well, my dude fights ghosts in a small town, that's enough. That's enough for me to constrain the story. As long as we're not in space, as long as there's no aliens, that's enough.
Right. Well, I think that's actually a good point to make, because that does kind of take us all the way back to the kind of the beginning of this episode. We were talking about like, the morality of the story versus the morality of reality, and that is, you can be exploring a moral idea and trying to cover all the aspects of it, right? But if it ends up being too broad, and I think, SK, this might be what you're getting at too, is if the moral idea becomes so broad that you have to keep expanding on the story, you might be not focused enough, right? You might need to bring it down a bit into something that's more focused so that your story can actually be cohesive in terms of like the actual story and not just the morality. So yeah, so it's like if we constrain it to a small town, we're kind of also forced to constrain the morality that we're exploring within that too, because we just don't have the room to explore something. So to go further than what we have done, and so we might realize, hey, there's this aspect of morality that we could be touching on, but it's like, is that what this story is ultimately about? Do we have the room to fit something like that into what we've already set up? So I think I'm understanding your point you were making before now, and yeah, it's all kind of coming together for me.
It's all coming together.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you need to, if you're, regardless of what direction you're doing it from, it is, I think that's a very important note, is that you should make sure you are not trying to cover too much. So if you're trying to cover racism as like your starting point, and you're trying to cover literally every possible aspect of racism, you might find, and still be like as deep as you need to be, you might find you just don't have the story to do it. There's just too much to cover because reality is a very complex fucking place. So you have to focus on something that's like a subset of that morality that you really want to hammer home on. And that kind of helps keep your story more contained. And so that is how you define the difference between the morality within the story, because it's only focused on this one thing, versus the morality of the real world.
Well, linking morals and stories to real life, I just think of there's a famous moral development, stages moral development from psychology from Kohlberg, and it's about stage one. When as you're growing up, you're trying to fine tune your own moral code. Like stage one acts like you're motivated by external punishments. 2, you have positive reinforcement. Stage 3, you have the opinions of others. Stage 4, you do things for social order. So it's like laws on a large scale. And stage 5, you have principles. You recognize that things have context. But stage 6 is your own moral code about how you want to follow things. And so if you wanted to kind of organize your characters or anything around that, that's a popular moral development stage
That's
model.
very interesting in how you describe that, because it's almost perfectly in line with like the different types of stories we tend to tell, which is like, the coming of age story, child to adult, but then it goes adult to leader, leader to king, I think, king to god, and like then there's also like man to beast or whatever. Yeah, but there's like 6 different types of transformation stories of like from one stage to another, and so it's kind of interesting that you describe, the moral psychological development of humans, because it seems like each of those stages kind of aligns with the types of stories we try to tell ourselves. So
I could definitely see a story for each stage. Like even like you have Sling Blade, for example, who's has some kind of mental disability, and he's obviously going to be motivated by the opinions of others, and you don't expect that he's going to like develop another moral dimension because of the mental disability, but he does, and he finds his own kind of like code that society doesn't agree with, but that we kind of like we can understand his choice at the end. So near the end here, I hate to bring up Truby so much, but he does have a basic strategy.
I have no problem bringing up Truby.
He has a basic strategy for when you're plotting your moral argument. So you start at values. Your hero has a certain belief about what makes a good life. They have a moral weakness, which is somehow creating harm to others, even if they don't realize it or something. There's a moral need, which they're trying to prove them. They need to improve themselves to get over that hurting others.
Right.
And then they have the first immoral action. They do something that hurts another,
This
and
is
then
something
after
usually we see at the very beginning of the story, before really anything's even taken off, is that like they do something that we immediately can can question, and the story questions as well, and maybe even another character goes, "What the fuck?" But we just kind of move past it. They don't really offer justification. That's just the way they are.
after the first immoral action, you have the desire. So the hero is coming up with a goal in order to get something, which is usually in conflict with an opponent. Then you have the drive, which is the series of actions, the plan.
Take.
Immoral actions, along the story, that moral need is going to keep cropping up, and they're going to keep hurting people. Like Anakin Skywalker is still going to keep sacrificing clone troopers. I know we weren't supposed to talk about Star Wars.
Or in
Anyway.
Taken, what's his name in Taken?
No, I don't know. All I know is that he has to kill.
Liam Neeson.
Neeson.
Probably his immoral action is that he keeps fucking killing people.
Probably.
That's just the name of the game, baby.
Yeah. And then he keeps, going out throughout the story, and until he's attacked by an ally, which is he attacked by an ally, like someone who confronts him with his moral need?
And that's a distinct difference from like an antagonist coming at you, right? Because an antagonist coming at you and challenging your actions is going to basically either like go, look, we're the same because you did this thing, right? Or they're going to be like, how can you be against me when you would be willing to do that, and it kind of, they like shame them or something, right? But an ally comes in and says, I want you to succeed, but I need you to see that you're doing this the wrong way, right? And the ally has a different approach to how they call out your main character, and it's a way of kind of having more of a clear-minded discussion about what's going on versus the antagonist. And it's an important role and an important step within this.
After you get attacked by the ally, you have the obsessive drive, which the characters double down on their desire. They know how to win. They're going to do it. And this leads to intensification of their immoral actions. And the story or other characters may provide criticism of their actions or justification of their actions. And then you get to the real thick, you get the battle, you get the final action against the opponent, one last action, moral or immoral, like Grand Theft Auto 5, are you going to kill that guy or are you going to let him go? Which is stupid. I hate Grand Theft Auto 5's moral choice. That was pretty dumb.
So don't use it as the example.
All right,
try Last of Us 2.
Is Sam gonna kill Smeagol or is he not? It's at least while Fred is looking. Moral decision. So I'm sorry. So after that final action, they have their moral self-realization, or they don't, where they realize all the hurt they've caused from their actions, and then the moral decision. So what do they do with that self-realization if they have it? And that reveals the theme. Beautiful.
And a lot of these steps, like, they can kind of happen you can play with the order of them. You can also, a lot of those middle steps, you can have them happen over and over again, right? There's like a continuous sequence of like people challenging you changing and, deepening your drive to get the desire, and somebody coming and challenging you again, kind of over and over and over again. So like all of that can kind of happen repeatedly before we get to the end. And in the end, you can kind of, fiddle around with the order of those things as well. It's just about like what makes the most sense for your story organically, and like what your character is doing and everything. Like if they aren't going to think to do a thing until after they've had the moral message or the moral revelation, then maybe they need to have that beforehand. It doesn't have to happen after they've made the decision to do something, or vice versa. Maybe they only realize it until they're forced into a decision, and then they go, "Oh yeah, I guess that was a better one, huh?" So it's totally based on what feels right for the story you're telling. So you have some wiggle room there. Anybody else have anything to add?
I feel like we're going to need another podcast because it's such a big topic.
Do you have a bunch more stuff to add?
There's a question of what about when the character's decision is just taken away from them, like so much Lord of the Rings, but Frodo at the end, he's almost like he's about to not throw the ring to the pit, but it's like, is he really making that decision or is it the ring?
I've
Is
always
it about
argued
that
that he
conflict?
didn't make the decision.
You always what?
Oh, true.
I've always argued that he never made that decision.
Yeah.
I think Frodo's the weakest hero I've ever seen.
Yeah. I think that's partly why that ending feels somewhat tragic.
Because there was no choice.
Because there was no choice. He didn't overcome it.
I have a diatribe about this, but I'll save it for later.
Okay.
Morality part 2.
Maybe we need to have maybe we need to have podcast episodes that are like specifically like just dissecting Lord of the Rings or dissecting Star Wars.
Get it out of the way.
Finally, so we can actually because we just keep bringing it up over and over and over again.
They're just so good.
Maybe
know?
it should be something besides a podcast episode. Maybe like a regular video.
Well,
yeah. True.
Fair. Nesca, you wanna do the outro? I know
No, I don't.
You've gotten really good at it.
No, not this time.
Well, thank you everybody
Goons
for
and
watching.
villains and all those. I'm trying to think of like a cool outro. Like, thank you, goons, villains, and heroes.
It doesn't sound.
It doesn't. Damn it. Okay.
Sounds like
Go
the
ahead.
ending of a children's show.
Actually, go ahead, Jack.
I was gonna say thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button. If you have an idea for what else you want us to talk about, leave a comment. If you agree or disagree with us, leave a comment. Hey,
Just leave something, please.
If you really enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button. Maybe you'll hear another episode of the podcast that you really enjoy. We come.
Maybe we'll have a lottery. Maybe we'll have a lottery. You never know.
If you do subscribe, hit that bell icon so you can be notified when we release the next episode.
I should have just done the outro.
This sounds like the end to an awkward date.
It always does,
if
dude.
If you
I'm
really
sorry.
enjoyed this date, then please fill out the scorecard. On a 1 to 10 scale, how likely are you to have the sex with me?
I am good at the sex. I've had positive reviews for all two of them.
Generally favorable reviews.
Average reviews.
Alright, well, see you next time, I guess.